Well, welcome everyone to our CAPE training program. Once again, my name is John Leatherman from Kansas State University. Just very briefly, our partners in this project, Mark Skidmore at the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, Rosa Solitz McKelvey, Communication and Logistics Coordinator, as well as Paula Miller, who is our CAPE postdoctoral fellow. We're going to continue with our introduction of the CAPE program, the Community Assessment and Education to Promote Behavioral Health Planning and Evaluation. Our project sponsors, once again, are the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the United States Department of Agriculture, and the USDA Rural Regional Development Centers. Our training program has two principal objectives. Once again, it's to enhance behavioral health literacy, and we do so utilizing the Mental Health First Aid Training Program, and to create and sustain community coalitions to address behavioral health concerns within our communities. Our training is broken up into several components. We are right now in the process of providing our introduction and overview, followed by the Mental Health First Aid Workshop. Then we will begin a series of video lectures discussing community scale initiatives and talk about such things as community needs assessment, community preparedness, building consensus within our community, as well as community strategic action planning. Following that will culminate in the development of a community strategic action plan that you can utilize within your home community to address a behavioral health concern that exists there. And then thereafter, we'll meet again in approximately 6 months to see how things are going in your communities. Here today, what we're going to be doing is talking about community action planning. And we will present to you an example action plan and a case study. And then finally, we'll do a wrap-up and a look ahead. Now, for those of you who are experienced in extension work, you've perhaps been involved in various types of community scale initiatives. And these tend to be fairly significant undertakings that require organizing various stakeholders within the community, perhaps creating a shared vision and purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, as well as motivating action that can address an issue, managing volunteers, and ultimately sustaining the initiative. For those of you who have done it, you know what a challenge that can be. And indeed, frequently we are met with limited success insofar as we can organize things, get things off to a fairly positive start, but then over time things seem to run down, peter out, and ultimately we're back to where we began. In my own experience as an extension outreach specialist, there's really only one way that I am aware that we can increase the probability of a successful outcome, and that is through the notion of strategic action planning. What we really need to do to enhance the probability of success is to create a roadmap for ourselves. And in that roadmap, we anticipate the obstacles that we're going to be facing, as well as we establish benchmarks that can help us to determine whether or not we are making the progress that we would hope and anticipate. The notion of strategic action planning really isn't foreign to us in extension. Indeed, it's just simply extension program planning. And what we will be actually utilizing is something called the logic model. You may be familiar with the logic model. It's a planning template that was created at the University of Wisconsin and has been widely embraced within the land-grant university system as well as the federal government. And indeed, what it does is it forces an individual to think very, very carefully and in a very detailed fashion about what they need to do in order to accomplish their objectives. And indeed, ultimately, it's nothing that's foreign to us. It's familiar to us. We simply think of it as extension program planning. Here in my own state of Kansas, every extension agent is expected to develop a logic model for each and every one of their major program initiatives. And I'm sure that in many other states that's the case as well. Now, with our community action plan, we are making the suggestion to you that we would offer an objective for you to consider working toward attaining. And that is to create and sustain a community coalition to address behavioral health challenges. Now, that is one of our principal objectives with the CAPE program, but ultimately, it's for you to decide. You may choose that you may have a community coalition to address behavioral health issues already. Or you may be interested in focusing on a subset of the population or a particular issue within your community. And that is perfectly fine as an alternative. We will make the suggestion that should such an entity as a community coalition not exist, it's a worthy objective to pursue. But if indeed that doesn't make sense in your particular case, you can identify any behavioral health need that you feel is important in your community and that you feel compelled to deal with. And so, but once again, what we are encouraging is the development of a community action plan, a strategic plan to try situation that exists. And indeed, one of the things that we are making available to you is the Community Action Planning Worksheet. This would be considered mandatory reading because what we're expecting is that you are actually going to go through the process of completing this action plan for the behavioral health issue that you would be dealing with. What it does simply is it breaks down the component parts of the logic model for your planning purposes. And we're going to walk through those very briefly here and then provide an example of one of these things that we've prepared for you. Now, the CAPE Community Action Planning Worksheet is really broken into three major parts. It first of all asks you to consider the big picture within your community, the situation that exists that could be improved, and what needs to be done to improve it. Then it asks you to get into the details of the planning process and consider in some considerable depth exactly what needs to happen in order to attain the goal that you would articulate. And then finally it asks to think about the various kinds of benchmarks or metrics that you can achieve in the near term, the intermediate term, and ultimately the long term that can help you to determine whether or not you are progressing toward the goal that you have. Now, first of all, the big picture that we consider, we would ask that you consider what is the circumstance that currently exists that needs to change, that could be improved. Articulate what needs to happen in order to improve that situation. In order to improve that situation, what are the most important things that need to happen? If there is a circumstance where something is less than perhaps it would be in the ideal, what needs to happen to make that better is what we are asking you to identify. And then ultimately, what will be different in the end when you have been able to achieve the desired change? What is the ultimate goal or outcome that you will achieve that will have improved the circumstance that you found initially problematic? Then we ask a series of questions about the details of making that change happen. We ask you to consider, first of all, what resources are going to be needed, what activities have to occur, and who needs to be involved and what do they need to do in order to achieve the changes that you would aspire to doing. Who will lead, who will start, who will help to sustain, who all needs to be involved in order to achieve this broad community goal. And then finally, we ask a series of questions about what can be accomplished in both the near term, the intermediate term, and the long term. When we talk about short-term action planning, we are considering a time frame of approximately perhaps 6 to 12 months. And we ask, what can be achieved in that first 6 to 12 months period of time? Well, within that period of time on a community scale initiative, you perhaps have the opportunity to enhance community awareness, increase knowledge with regard to an issue, or perhaps affect community attitudes with regard to an issue. In the intermediate term, the period of perhaps a year to 3 years, we would hope within that time frame, the time would be sufficient to begin to affect individual behaviors, to have made certain decisions on behalf of the community, to see actions taking place or policies having been adopted. And then in the long term, we ask, how will the situation be different if you are able to achieve your goal? How will you know that you have in fact achieved that goal? And what are the metrics that go along with knowing that? And so here what we're going to do is walk through a bit of an example with you as to how to undertake our community action planning. And here I'll just lay out a hypothetical for you. Perhaps we articulate what needs to change. Well, we determined that we need some sort of a community organizational entity that can motivate action related to community behavioral health challenges. Which is, incidentally, the objective that we have suggested is to create a community coalition that can effectively deal with behavioral health challenges. That's what we articulate as the needed change. What are the most important priorities? Well, first of all, we have to secure the cooperation of organizational and institutional entities that deal with various aspects of behavioral health challenges that exist. And our desired outcome, perhaps we would articulate as having established a task force that's positioned to take effective collaborative action on behalf of community behavioral health challenges. And here we'll look at a case study. The case study is Riley County, Kansas. This is where I'm located, in Manhattan, Kansas, where indeed we have done the work necessary to create such a coalition, and we'll look at what some of the things that it's been able to accomplish. Now, here again, we've already created a community action plan to accomplish just exactly the objective that I've identified. And this is available as an example, a model to you, so you can see what a completed action plan looks like. It's less than 5 pages in length. It took me a couple of hours to really think through all and fill in all of the blanks with regard to planning. So it's not an overwhelming task. It's something that with a bit of time and thought can be accomplished easily in the course of an afternoon. And that is what we are asking you to do on behalf of a behavioral health challenge that exists within your community. And our training program is intended to perhaps discuss various elements of the community organization and change process that can help you to effectively articulate that which needs to occur in order to achieve the goal that you've identified. Now, here's the situation. This is the big picture. Here in Manhattan, Kansas, it's the home of Kansas State University. Kansas State University has about 24,000 students. We are also adjacent to Fort Riley Military Reservation. There are 16 to 17,000 troops stationed there. Now, as you might imagine, in our community of approximately 75,000 people, that is a disproportionate share of the population within a very young age range, and they do perhaps provide for some special needs that exist within our community. And indeed, a panel of experts at a given time recently identified what they perceive to be the most important behavioral health challenges that we are facing in Riley County. Those include excessive stress, alcohol use, excessive levels of anxiety that exists, tobacco use, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder associated with our military population. At the same time, the policy context within the state of Kansas is becoming much, much more challenging insofar as we have experienced some fairly significant financial cuts to mental health services assistance that comes to the community to deal with the problems that exist. Given the needs that exist and the policy context that we're facing, indeed, we have to come up with some of our own self-help strategies. And that is where we need to sort of coordinate among ourselves, collaborate together to help ourselves, because it's apparent nobody's going to come in and do it for us. And so the outcome that we identify is ultimately to organize and sustain what we will call the Riley County Mental Health Task Force. Now, what would the task force do? We want to articulate exactly what its role might be. Well, the task force would be for purposes of information sharing among various kinds of institutions and entities that deal with various mental and behavioral health issues. It would foster the opportunity for collaboration across these entities. It would provide a liaison with certain essential institutions within our community, including local government, law enforcement, as well as healthcare, and as needed, it can provide for a unified voice on behalf of local mental health needs that exist within the community. So that is the role that we see our task force performing on behalf of the community. Well, now we start thinking about what has to happen in order to accomplish that. What sorts of resources are going to be necessary? Well, we need to begin with an inventory of the organizations that in some fashion deal with issues surrounding mental health and behavioral health challenges. We need to reach out and fulfill different leadership roles on behalf of our task force, and be sure that we are connecting with the leadership of the various entities that we would hope to participate. Financial resources we consider, and we recognize that for purposes of information sharing and collaboration, they may in and of themselves be minimal. We need to establish what kind of a time commitment would be necessary, meeting location, as well as organizational details. And in our sample report, I provide answers to all of those types of questions. Now, in our particular instance, the membership of our mental health task force might include, and does include, the Mental Health Services Agency, local government officials, county health department, the law enforcement entities within our county, community corrections, and given the importance of these institutions, educational institutions, military representation, as well as representation from the faith community. Others can be called upon to participate and work with the task force on an as-needed basis, and all meetings that are held are open to the public, and anyone who has an interest in seeing what the task force is doing or engaging in any particular discussion is welcome to attend. Now, what we would hope to achieve within the short, intermediate, and long term, well, in the short term, what we would perhaps focus our effort on would be recruitment, organization, and initiate the task force. We would hope that in the intermediate term, 1 to 3 years. We might see ongoing activity, some type of a community monitoring program to determine the needs that exist. We might hope that partnerships would be established and collaboration would be evident. And ultimately, we would hope in the long term to see some measurable improvement in the identified behavioral health needs that we've articulated at the beginning, whether it be in relation to post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol, tobacco abuse, and the like. Well, does the establishment of such a task force make a difference? In our own case of Riley County, Kansas, indeed, in an earlier rendition of the CAPE program, we actually undertook an initiative where we tested out what we considered to be an early warning behavioral health surveillance system. This was to impanel a group of individuals who have contact with the public and who generally deal with mental health and other kinds of behavioral health challenges. And we impaneled them to periodically respond to a survey, and we monitored those high priority issues and watched for emerging issues over the course of a period of time. Now, we were successful in attracting the resources to undertake participate as one of the pilot communities among approximately a dozen across the United States. We made application for the resources to be a pilot community, and I, together with our executive director of our Community Mental Health Services Agency, were successful in making an application. We decided that instead of just simply undertaking this initiative among ourselves, we would work with the existing Riley County Mental Health Task Force and share that information with them. It would seem to have sort of increased the legitimacy of what we were trying to do. Well, over the course of 12 to 18 months, I had the opportunity to attend their meetings and make presentations as the project unfolded. And indeed, there had been some ongoing discussion previously, and this isn't just unique to Riley County or Manhattan, Kansas, but nationally, about the intersection of mental health issues and law enforcement as we increasingly attempt to keep people closer to their home communities. Invariably, law enforcement is encountering more of these kinds of problems in relation to mental health. Well, that discussion had been ongoing, but it perhaps spurred the thought to try to measure the level of the problem, if any, that existed. And indeed, our police department, called the Riley County Police Department, began tracking what they suspected to be mental health encounters that they were experiencing on patrol. And over a period of time, they estimated each month they were encountering 35 to 40 instances of individuals with some sort of a mental health problem. Our local hospital started tracking the diagnoses of those who came to the emergency room. And indeed, they estimated that in any given year, they are seeing between 500 to 600 psychiatric diagnoses coming in to the emergency room on an annual basis. And so even within a relatively small community, it was apparent that there was some challenge that existed. Well, that led our Community Mental Health Services Agency and our police department to ultimately partner in what is called a co-responder program. And indeed, we've been able to obtain the resources necessary to hire 2 full-time positions who are available to work with the police department when they suspect they are going to be dealing with circumstances that may have a mental health component. They will also be working with our county jail to deal with the folks who end up there and who may need some additional assistance with stabilization stabilization and crisis management. And so that is just simply one example of what such a coalition can accomplish when you get the right people together to discuss common issues, problems, and needs, and ultimately it can lead to some good outcomes. And indeed, we will be looking in some greater detail as we go through the course of our training program at some of these activities and some of the outcomes that we've been able to achieve here in Riley County, Kansas, in pursuit of that notion of building and sustaining a community coalition to respond to behavioral health challenges. And indeed, that's the assignment that we hope that you will undertake, to draft a community action plan to create and sustain a local coalition to respond to community behavioral health needs in your own community. But as I've indicated, if such already exists, or if your interests and needs lie elsewhere, you can select any behavioral health challenge that exists within your community. But we would ask that you apply this same planning process, the same thinking process to the behavioral health challenge that you care to engage. So with that, we'll wrap things up for the time being and take a look ahead. We have scheduled a webinar here in the coming weeks, and what we will have the opportunity to do is discuss this introduction and overview of the CAPE program, answer any questions that you may have in relation to your participation, in relation to expectations that we would have on your behalf for participating in the training program. Assuming that you remain interested in the CAPE training, we will shortly thereafter have our mental health first aid training workshop. It's organized locally within your state. And after that training program, approximately 1 week later, we'll have another webinar where we have the opportunity to discuss your experiences in the training program and begin the thinking process of how we can utilize this information and knowledge in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. And then we will continue on with our video lecture series and talk about the process of organizing and engaging the broader community in some sort of a community scale initiative. Those are the two things we'd like to accomplish, is the idea of enhancing behavioral health literacy, both among our participants and the communities with which they interact, as well as making you a more effective community change agent in order to deal with not only the behavioral health issues that exist, but whatever your extension programming may require. So finally, once again, here's contact information. You can contact me individually. If you have any questions and would like to discuss an idea, I'll be happy to do so. Ultimately, Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University, as well as Rosa Solis McKelvey, are also available and can answer questions with regard to our CAPE training program. So with that, I'll close for now, and I'll look forward to visiting with you in our next video lecture. Thank you. Goodbye.